Rebreathers are awesome tools and they offer a lot of utility for diving applications, but there's a lot of myths and misconceptions about why they're used and how they work. So these are 4 of the myths that I hear on a really regular basis from people who are maybe interested in getting into CCR diving. First up is that rebreathers are safer than their open circuit counterpart. With the rebreather, because we're breathing recycled gas, our time pressure is much less than it is on open circuit. And especially if we're looking at something like cave diving, if we get lost or into a situation where we have to solve a problem, the rebreather is going to give us a longer time to solve that problem. And there's absolutely been cases where someone has been on a rebreather and that time has given them the ability to solve the problem that they couldn't have solved on open circuit. When we look at it through that lens, rebreathers do seem a lot safer, but that's a really myopic view of safety and risk. So when we look at the whole picture of risk on a rebreather, our risk of hypoxia is higher than it is on open circuit. Sitting at the surface with a tank that's got analyzed 32% on it, breathing off of a second stage regulator, our risk of hypoxia is almost negligible. That's not true on a rebreather. The same applies to hyperoxia. Our chance with 32% at 50 feet deep on a second stage regulator is very low. On a rebreather, that's not true. And this is a crucial element of understanding when it comes to rebreathers. On open circuit, if we're breathing, we're probably okay. On the rebreather, that's not necessarily true. We also have the risk of a chemical injury from a caustic cocktail, which is wet scrubber material coming in contact with us. When we take a proper look at risks and a proper look at accident analysis, and the data are very clear here, rebreathers are not safer than their open circuit counterparts. They're a tool that should be applied when the logistics or the complexity of open circuit outweighs that seesaw and makes that risk an acceptable risk for that dive. The second myth I hear quite a bit is that rebreather divers do way less deco than their open circuit counterparts. Rebreathers are a constant PO2 tool. So our partial pressure of oxygen is the same all the way through the dive, including our ascent and decompression. And typically we're operating between a 1.0 or a 1.3 bar partial pressure of oxygen during the dive. Anything higher than a 1.3 really isn't appropriate while we're on the rebreather. In the open circuit world, we're doing gas switches to more ideal gases, which bring our partial pressure of oxygen up and reduce the partial pressure of inert gas. So when we compare dive for dive, sometimes rebreathers actually have more decompression because we're so much more conservative with that oxygen exposure. The third is this idea that the rebreather is always trying to kill you. Maybe this is more of a catchphrase than a myth, but it's really silly. I think people say it to sound cool, and it's flawed because the rebreather is designed to keep you alive. That's the whole purpose of the engineering and the components and the mechanisms that are in place for the machine. Now those components can fail, or we can make mistakes that can cause an accident, but thinking of the thing on your back or your chest or your side as a killing machine that I'm constantly fighting off is just completely flawed because its purpose is the opposite of that. As far as a mentality or a thought experiment goes, it's much more helpful to think of you as a human that makes mistakes as being the linchpin for this machine doing its job. There are protocols for monitoring and maintaining the machine underwater to ensure that it's doing its job, which is to allow us to go have fun underwater. And we need to hold ourselves accountable to ensure that those processes take place. It's just a machine and we're in control of it. So that mentality makes a lot more sense for actually preventing accidents and staying on top of ourselves and our machine. Last on the list is this idea that rebreathers are like starting over with diving completely. And this is linked to the idea that our open circuit experience is irrelevant because when we get on the rebreather, we're just little baby divers again, and we're learning everything new. This is completely not true. People with a lot of open circuit experience have a way easier transition onto the rebreather. And that's because they've been out diving. When you go out diving, you understand things like awareness, dealing with your dive buddies, getting on and off the boat, environmental conditions. And also a big one is water comfort. The more time we spend in and around the water, the more tricks that we learn to be comfortable in the water. Those are just a couple of examples of the kind of things that we learn when we go diving and we build up a bunch of experience that can help make the transition onto a rebreather easier. So there's absolutely nuances with monitoring the rebreather, controlling it, and our buoyancy control, but we cannot discount how important open circuit diving experience is before we get onto that rebreather. So those are 4 common misconceptions that I hear with rebreathers: that they're safer, which they are not; that they give us less decompression than doing the same dive on open circuit. That's not always true; that they're always trying to kill us. They're designed for quite the opposite; and that they're like learning to dive all over again. An open circuit experience is not very important. And that's definitely not true. If you're interested in learning more about rebreathers, feel free to give me a holler, and thank you for watching.